In one of my previous videos, I showed you 4 different types of lighting that you can use in the studio, plus a bunch of example photos. I talked briefly about some of the uses of each type of light, but I promised an in-depth video on each of the lighting types with more photos to illustrate the different effects that you can get with each of them. I've done those in-depth videos on speed lights and on continuous fluorescent lights. Today, it's time to talk about strobes. I'll show you lots of examples of photos I've taken over the years with my strobes, plus some photos that I just took this week. At the end of the video, I will let you know where you can find out more about the photos and about the different techniques that I've used over the years. I have in my studio these 2 Alien Bees B800 strobes. You can find strobes in a whole range of prices. These really are fairly inexpensive as strobes go, but I've had these 2 lights for close to 10 years, and they're still going strong. You can purchase different types of modifiers to go on the light head. Modifiers direct and change the way the light falls on your subject. I have 2 umbrella modifiers here. One is a shoot-through umbrella. That means that the light goes through the umbrella, coming out the other side, and it's nice and soft and flattering, and it's in a wide area, and it falls on the subject that way. For this reason, I typically use it as my main light when I am taking a portrait. The light will be flattering, and the distinction between light and shadow will be nice and soft. On my other light, I've got a reflector umbrella. So the light bounces off of the underside of the umbrella, softens it a bit, and it spreads it out to fall on the scene. This happens to be a reversible umbrella with silver on one side and gold on the other. The different colors will change the color tone of the light. The quality of light coming from this isn't going to be as soft as the shoot-through umbrella, but because it isn't going through any material, it has the potential to be brighter or more powerful. I typically use it as my fill light for a scene. There are all kinds of modifiers that you can purchase. I showed you my umbrellas, but you can find soft boxes which fit over the light head and act in much the same way as the shoot-through umbrella, where you get a flattering and soft light. You can find gels, which will change the color of light for your different effects. Or you can get a snoot or a grid, which direct the light to a narrow area. Your choice of modifier depends upon the lighting effect that you're looking to achieve. I chose these 2 umbrellas for my strobes, but I do have soft boxes and a grid for my continuous fluorescent lights because I do find that I like to play around with different effects. If I didn't have those continuous fluorescent lights, I'd probably have purchased at least a snoot or a grid for my strobes. You also need a way to trigger these lights, to tell them when to flash. You can do this in a number of ways. Some are where you're tethered to them with a cable. Others are wireless, like radio triggers, but you do need additional units for your camera and or light head for that. It all depends upon your particular equipment though. I trigger my strobes optically, which means that I use the pop-up flash on the camera or a speed light on the camera. I set it at a low enough power that the light doesn't illuminate my subject, but it does make it to the light heads. When the light from that flash reaches the light heads, they flash as well. Okay, now that we've talked about the gear, what can these things do? And why would you choose strobes over the other types of studio lighting? One of the biggest benefits of strobes is that they can provide a lot of light from a relatively small package. In fact, these are the most powerful of my studio lighting options. However, they have variable output, so I can adjust that power to get the exact effect that I want, whether that be super bright and high key or a more traditional look or moody and low key. Now, you can get variable output and a fair amount of power from speed lights too, which are often less expensive and smaller in size. But strobes will almost always be able to provide you with the most power. Another thing strobes do well is freeze motion. Because the burst of light from a lot of strobes is about 1/8,000th of a second, assuming your environment is otherwise dark, you're effectively shooting with a shutter speed of 1/8,000th. Fast, right? This is where strobes would get a leg up on continuous lighting options. I mentioned a minute ago that strobes provide a lot of power in a relatively small package. That means that they do travel pretty easily. I can detach and collapse my umbrellas and light stands and then put the light heads in their carrying cases and be on my way. Throw in a multi-head extension cord and I'll be ready. You can even get battery packs so that you don't need to be plugged into an outlet. And I have taken these things on the road plenty of times to events or to clients' homes for portraits. However, you do end up with multiple bags to carry, so they aren't exactly quick and easy to travel with. So strobes have modeling lights that remain on to help you see, but they put out a burst of light to illuminate the subject for your photo. Because of that, there are a few things that you sacrifice. 1, these are not suited for video. So if you like to do still photography and videography, you may want to look at continuous lights. Another thing that you'll realize is that you won't really know what your photo is going to look like until you actually take it. With experience, you end up with an idea of how the output power and placement of lights, along with camera settings, will affect your end result. But some amount of back and forth where you're taking the photo, then adjusting your setup will need to be done. Now, the modeling lights help a little bit with this, but not until you actually trigger that burst of light will you actually see what you've got. Also, you will not get to use auto exposure on your camera, like aperture priority or shutter priority, unless you are using the Nikon CLS or Canon equivalent, and then the results can be inconsistent. Using manual mode, though, isn't necessarily a drawback, but it is something to consider. On a related note, on the upside, or maybe downside, depending upon how you look at it, you can't use shutter speed to control the exposure off of the main lights. You can, however, adjust aperture and ISO on your camera and the output on the strobe units to adjust exposure. That being said, you can use shutter speed to control the amount of ambient light that makes it into the shot. Like, if you want the least amount of ambient light, you can shoot at your camera's flash sync speed. One last thing regarding these lights is temperature. Even though these strobes produce a burst of light, rather than having high-powered light aimed at the subject all of the time, it can still get hot in the spotlight. So these are incandescent bulbs. They do put off heat, which can build up if you have the subject in the studio for any length of time. The light heads themselves have fans to cool themselves, but your subject doesn't, so that may be a consideration for you as well. Okay, you've seen lots of photos in this video. I've been using my set of strobes for many years. I can't even fathom how many shoots I've actually done with them. I have brought them out in the field for on-site portraits at people's houses, at weddings, at events, but I've used them most in my own studio. You can find a whole slew of shoots I've done with them in my studio with their accompanying technique videos in the index on my site. However, I did do a shoot specifically for this video. You can find a link to that in the description of this video. You'll find a sample shot there with a bit of technical information to go along with it. And if you're a VIP, you'll be able to log in and see the entire gallery of images, plus this week's VIP show, where you'll hear a ton of technical and background information about that particular shoot, among other things. So, strobes, continuous fluorescent lights, speed lights, work lamps. You've got many choices for your studio. What do you use? And why did you choose them? Do you like them? Let me know in the comments.